The morning was brutally cold, the kind of November cold that makes your bones ache and your breath crystallize in front of your face. Sat in his old Civic for 15 minutes before getting out, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. Outside the windshield, the landscape stretched flat and desolate, bare fields, weathered fences, and a massive red barn that looked like it had been holding its breath for decades. He'd driven 2 hours from Louisville just to be here, to this place he'd only found by accident while spiraling through the internet at 2 in the morning. Hadn't been sleeping much lately. He was 26 years old, though some days he felt ancient. 6 months ago, his best friend David had died in a car accident, a senseless, stupid collision on a highway that shouldn't have mattered but did. David was supposed to get married next spring. He was supposed to have kids, grow old, tell embarrassing stories at his future wedding. Instead, had given a eulogy at a funeral and then slowly, methodically, withdrawn from the world. He'd taken a leave of absence from his software development job. He'd stopped answering texts. He'd stopped leaving his apartment except for food. His therapist, who he'd stopped seeing, had suggested he needed to get out more and reconnect with purpose. Had nodded politely and ignored the advice. Until last week, when he couldn't sleep again and found himself reading about animal auctions. It was a rabbit hole, really. He'd been watching a documentary about factory farming when an article caught his attention. Hundreds of animals rejected at auction each year. The images haunted him. Dogs with dead eyes, horses with ribs showing, cats in cages forgotten, animals that nobody wanted, that the world had deemed disposable. Recognized himself in every one of those photographs. He too felt disposable lately, like the world would barely notice if he disappeared. So he'd looked up the nearest auction house and put it in his GPS. Now, standing in the cold November air, almost turned back. What was he doing here? What did he think he'd accomplish? He wasn't an activist. He wasn't even a particularly animal-loving person. He'd never had pets growing up. His parents were practical people who believed animals were working creatures or nothing at all. But something in his chest had been pulled toward this place, something desperate and aching that he couldn't quite name. The auction house reeked of manure and diesel fuel. Inside, the air was thick and warm despite the open doors, heavy with the presence of hundreds of animals. Walked slowly through the barn, past cattle pens where muscular cows lowed anxiously. Farmers in worn jackets nodded to each other, discussing prices and bloodlines like they were trading stocks. Felt completely out of place in his clean jeans and expensive North Face jacket. He looked like someone who'd taken a wrong turn from the mall. He found a seat in the bleachers just as the auction began. An elderly auctioneer with a weathered face and a surprisingly kind smile stood at a microphone, his voice falling into the rapid-fire rhythm of his profession. Lot 15 heifer, 3 years old, excellent breeding stock. Hands went up. Numbers were called. Animals that had stood in pens for weeks were suddenly reduced to price tags and quick handshakes. It was efficient. It was brutal. It was business. Sat through 30 lots, watching cattle exchange hands, watching a few horses led through the auction ring. His mind was numb to most of it, a defense mechanism. But then something shifted in the room. There was a change in the auctioneer's tone, almost imperceptible but definitely there. A kind of hesitation. Lot 47, the auctioneer said, and there was something almost apologetic in his voice. Animal here came to us from a property seizure. Older canine, mixed breed German Shepherd cross approximately. The handlers led the dog into the ring. Stopped breathing. The dog was a disaster. There was no other word for it. His coat was the color of old ash and matted so badly you could see pink skin underneath in patches. His ribs jutted out like a xylophone, each bone distinct and horrifying. One of his ears flopped sideways while the other stood at an odd angle and torn. His left front leg bent slightly inward, and he walked with a pronounced limp that made his heart physically hurt. But it was the dog's eyes that destroyed him, milky, clouded over with cataracts, and filled with a kind of profound resignation. This was a creature that had simply given up on life. "We'll start the bidding at $50, the auctioneer said, and heard something in his voice now, something that wasn't quite pity but close to it. The auctioneer knew nobody would bid. He knew this dog was a lost cause. $50 anyone, the auctioneer's voice rang through the barn. Silence. The dog shifted his weight, wincing slightly. Probably arthritis, thought numbly. Probably pain with every movement. $40, going once, going twice. A man in the front row scratched his neck, not out of interest but out of a nervous habit. Another farmer yawned and checked his watch. Nobody was looking at the dog. Nobody cared. The dog was refuse, waste, something to be processed and disposed of. "Going 3 times, the auctioneer said, and he raised his gavel. His eyes locked on the dog's face. He saw something there, not hope, because the dog was past hope. He saw an echo of his own hollowness. He saw a creature that had endured unspeakable things and survived anyway, only to end up here in this barn waiting to be written off. 6 months of grief crystallized in his chest. 6 months of feeling like nobody saw him, like he was invisible, like his existence mattered to no one. All of it coalesced into a single, desperate moment of clarity. This dog needed someone to see him. This dog needed someone to say his life mattered. His hand shot up. $75, he heard himself shout. The sound was so sudden, so unexpected, that the entire barn seemed to freeze. Heads turned. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up in surprise. The handlers stopped moving. Even the dog seemed to look up, as if he couldn't quite believe anyone had spoken for him. "Well," the auctioneer said, a slight smile crossing his weathered face, "we've got 75, going once, going twice." Nobody raised a hand. There was no competitor. There was only the stranger in the clean jacket and the broken heart, the man who'd driven 2 hours because he recognized himself in a dying dog. "Sold," the gavel came down with a sharp crack. $75 to the gentleman in the blue jacket. As the handlers moved the dog toward the exit, the animal's entire body began to tremble. His cloudy eyes widened, not with hope, but with fear. He'd learned that when someone approached him, pain usually followed. He'd learned that human attention was something to dread. Walked toward him slowly, his own heart hammering in his chest. "Hey, buddy," whispered, extending his hand carefully. "It's okay, I've got you now." The dog flinched as if it struck him. He looked away, shoulders hunched, waiting for the blow that had taught him to expect cruelty from every human hand. But didn't move. He just stood there, hand extended, and whispered the only promise he could make. "Nobody's throwing you away. Not anymore, I promise." In that moment, didn't know he was buying a dog. He was buying a mirror. He was buying a second chance for both of them. The transaction took 45 minutes, which felt like both an eternity and a single heartbeat. Sat in a cramped office that smelled like coffee and old paperwork, signing documents he barely read. The auction house owner, a man named Bill with a thick Kentucky accent and suspicious eyes, seemed genuinely baffled by his purchase. "You sure about this, son?" Bill asked, sliding a clipboard across the desk. "That dog's probably not gonna make it much longer anyway. Might be doing him a favor too." "I'm sure," said firmly, not letting Bill finish that sentence. He didn't need to hear it. He already knew what the alternative was. He'd seen it in the auctioneer's eyes, heard it in the tone of that falling gavel. This dog had minutes, maybe hours, before someone decided he was too broken to bother with. "All right then, that'll be $75 plus 25 for the paperwork." Bill held out his hand, paid in cash, watching as the man scribbled something on a receipt that probably had no legal bearing whatsoever. "I'll get you the medical records from the seizure," Bill said, shuffling through a filing cabinet. Not much there. The dog came from a property where he was tied to a tree for, well, we're not entirely sure how long. Neighbors called animal control. He's got some behavioral issues, as you probably noticed. Might bite, might not. Hard to say with these old-timers. Took the folder without responding. His mind was already moving ahead, already planning. He'd left work. He had savings. He could figure this out. When walked back into the barn where they were holding the dog, the reality of what he'd done crashed over him like a wave. The dog was still trembling, still huddled in a corner of a metal pen, his body rigid with fear. Up close, could see things he'd missed in the chaos of the auction ring. Deep scars ran along the dog's back and sides, some old and faded, others newer and still pink. His nails were overgrown and curved, suggesting he hadn't walked on solid ground in months. There were bare patches on his coat where the fur had been rubbed away, probably from lying in the same spot for extended periods. "Hey, buddy," said softly, kneeling down to make himself less intimidating. "We're going home now, okay?" The dog's only response was to press himself harder against the corner, as if trying to become one with the concrete wall. The handler, a weathered woman named Sue, who actually seemed to care about the animals, helped load the dog into the back of his Civic. She'd rigged up a makeshift crate with some old blankets, and she spoke to the dog in gentle tones as she guided him in. "This one's got some spirit left," Sue said, more to herself than to. "Most dogs in that condition, they'd have given up completely. But I've seen this guy try to stand up, try to move. He's a fighter, even if he doesn't know it." Wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that somewhere under all that trauma and fear, there was something worth saving. He wanted to believe it because he desperately needed to believe it about himself. The drive home was quiet except for the occasional sound of the dog shifting in the back seat. Kept the radio off and the windows cracked, letting fresh air flow through. He'd called ahead to his landlord, a remarkably kind woman named Mrs. who'd always liked him, and warned her that he'd be bringing home an animal. She'd said it was fine, that her late husband had always loved dogs, and that she'd be happy to have life in the apartment complex again. When they arrived, had to practically carry the dog inside. The animal could barely manage the stairs and found himself supporting most of his weight, feeling each rib through the thin, matted fur. The dog's breathing was labored, his heart racing against chest. Terror, pure, unadulterated terror. Settled him in the bedroom, the one that had been dark and closed for months, ever since David's funeral when had stopped being able to look at the guest bed where David used to sleep. He laid down old blankets and towels, creating a kind of nest in the corner. He filled a bowl with water and placed it nearby, along with some of the premium dog food he'd stopped at a pet store to buy on the way home. "Okay," whispered, sitting on the edge of his bed and looking at the trembling animal. "What should I call you?" The dog didn't answer, obviously. He just stared at the wall, his jaw clenched, his breathing quick and shallow. But as sat there watching him, a name came to mind: Scout. It felt right somehow. Not the name of a broken thing, but the name of something that was meant to explore the world, meant to discover and be curious and be brave. "Scout," said aloud, "your name is Scout." Scout didn't acknowledge the name. He didn't move or blink or give any indication that he'd heard, but would say it anyway, over and over, until it started to feel real. Until it started to feel like Scout wasn't just a problem to be solved, but a being with an identity, a history, a reason to exist. That first night didn't sleep. He sat on the floor beside Scout watching him breathe, terrified that at any moment the dog would simply stop. Scout didn't eat the food he'd left out. He didn't drink water. He didn't move from his corner except to occasionally shift his weight with obvious pain. Around 3 a.m., started talking to him, not the kind of talking you do with other people, but the kind you do when you're desperate and lonely and the words are more for you than for anyone else. "I know you're scared," whispered into the darkness. "I'm scared too. I've been scared for 6 months, ever since my best friend died. I've been so scared that I forgot how to do anything except be afraid. But then I saw you and I thought, maybe if I could help you, maybe that would mean something. Maybe that would prove that I'm not as useless as I feel." Scout's ear twitched slightly at the sound of his voice, though his body remained rigid. "You don't have to trust me yet," continued. "You don't have to believe that anything's going to be okay, but I'm going to sit here and I'm going to wait, because I think maybe we're the same, you and me. I think maybe we both got broken by people who were supposed to care about us, and maybe Maybe we can figure out how to be less broken together." By dawn, Scout had eaten nothing. He hadn't moved except for the occasional shudder that ran through his body, but he also hadn't attacked, hadn't bitten him or snapped at him. He'd simply endured his presence, which felt like a start. Called into his company that morning and formally requested an extended leave of absence. His supervisor, confused but accommodating, approved it. Had never taken time off, never been unreliable. He had goodwill built up. He was going to need it. For the next 3 days, did little except sit beside Scout, speak to him in soft tones, and watch as the dog slowly, incrementally, began to accept his presence. He didn't try to force Scout to eat or move or do anything. He simply existed nearby, a steady, calm presence that represented something different from whatever violence Scout had known before. On the third night, Scout finally ate a few bites of food. It was a tiny thing, barely noticeable, but felt it like a victory. It meant Scout was still trying. It meant Scout hadn't completely surrendered to despair. And that meant couldn't surrender either. By the fourth day, Scout had managed to eat half a bowl of food and drink some water. It wasn't much, but it felt like a resurrection. He'd spent those 4 days in a state of hypervigilance, watching Scout's breathing, checking constantly to make sure the dog was still alive. He'd called in favors from friends, people he hadn't spoken to in months, asking for recommendations on veterinarians, pet supplies, anything that might help. Most people seemed surprised to hear from him, relieved even, like they'd been worried about him and were grateful for any sign of life. On the 5th day, knew he couldn't wait any longer. Scout needed professional help. Scout needed someone who actually knew what they were doing because was flying blind. He looked up veterinary clinics in Louisville and found one called Riverside Animal Hospital, just 15 minutes away. When he called to make an appointment, he tried to explain Scout's condition as best he could. "How old is the dog?" the receptionist asked. "I'm not sure," admitted. "Maybe 10, 12. He came from a seizure situation, so his history is unclear." There was a pause. "Okay, bring him in as soon as you can. Doctor has an opening this afternoon." Getting Scout into the car was an adventure. The dog could barely walk and had to physically support most of his weight as they made their way down the stairs and to the parking lot. Scout's legs seemed to give out every few steps, as if his body was simply too damaged to cooperate. Carried him the last few yards and gently placed him in the back seat, where Scout immediately began to shake. "It's okay, buddy," said, climbing into the driver's seat. "We're going to get you fixed up." Scout didn't look convinced. The waiting room smelled like other animals and disinfectant. Sat in a plastic chair with Scout's head resting on his lap, stroking the matted fur gently. Other people came and went. A woman with a cat in a carrier, a teenager with a golden retriever that looked aggressively healthy. Everyone seemed to stare at Scout with a mixture of pity and disgust. Wanted to tell them all to mind their own business, that Scout was perfect, that Scout was brave. But he stayed quiet. When Doctor emerged from the back, was struck by her kindness. She was a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that held genuine warmth. She knelt down beside Scout without hesitation, running her hands over his body with a practiced touch. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, and something in her tone made his throat tighten. "Come on back, honey. Let's get a better look at you." The examination took 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. Doctor was thorough, checking Scout's joints, his teeth, his eyes, his ears. She drew blood samples and took x-rays. She asked detailed questions about where Scout had come from, what he'd been eating, how he was behaving. Answered as honestly as he could, feeling like he was being judged for every inadequacy, every gap in his knowledge. When Doctor finally sat down at her desk in the small examination room, knew something was wrong. Her face had taken on a serious expression that made his stomach drop. She said gently, "Scout is in very poor condition. The x-rays show significant arthritis throughout his joints, particularly in his spine and hips. His left front leg has been broken at some point in the past and healed incorrectly. It's probably causing him chronic pain. He's severely malnourished, which has compromised his immune system. His teeth are in terrible shape, and I suspect he's had dental disease for years. But he's eating now, said quickly. He ate some food this morning. I'm glad to hear that, doctor said, her voice remaining gentle. But I need to be honest with you. This dog is approximately 12 years old. In dog years, he's the equivalent of an 84-year-old human. Given his conditions, his quality of life going forward, she paused, choosing her words carefully. I would recommend seriously considering euthanasia. It might be the most merciful option. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, which, realized with horror, they were. What? Felt the room tilt slightly. No, there has to be something we can do. We could start him on pain medication, doctor continued, her eyes holding a mixture of compassion and realism. We could try to improve his nutrition and his overall health. But realistically, this dog has probably been suffering for a very long time. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let them go. Stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the linoleum floor. Scout, sensing his distress, lifted his head and whimpered softly. No, said firmly. I didn't buy him just to kill him. I didn't go to that auction to save his life so I could end it in a veterinary clinic. I understand you care about him, doctor said, and her tone suggested she genuinely did. But sometimes caring means making the hard choice. I'm not making that choice, said. He looked down at Scout at those clouded, frightened eyes. He deserves a chance. He deserves to know what it's like to live without pain, without fear. We're going to do this. Tell me what he needs. Doctor was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, if you're committed to this, here's what we'll do. Start him on a high-quality senior dog food. We have some here you can take with you. I'm going to prescribe pain medication, an anti-inflammatory, and some antibiotics to help with what looks like an early infection. We'll need to get those teeth cleaned, though that will require anesthesia, which is risky given his age and condition. But if we don't address the dental disease, it could kill him just as surely as anything else. Over the next hour, Doctor wrote out prescriptions, gave detailed care instructions, and scheduled follow-up appointments. She showed him how to administer Scout's medications, what to watch for in terms of warning signs, and how to help Scout with gentle exercises to maintain his mobility. You're going to have some hard days, Doctor said as was leaving. There will be moments when you question whether this is the right decision. But if this dog has any fight left in him, any will to live, you giving him that chance could change everything. That night, sat on the floor beside Scout and cried. He cried for Scout's suffering, for all the pain that broken dog had endured. He cried for David, for the loss that had sent him spiraling into darkness. He cried for himself, for being so lost that he'd driven to an auction house looking for salvation in an animal nobody wanted. But beneath the tears was something else, determination. We're going to do this, whispered to Scout, running his fingers through the dog's matted fur. I don't care what anyone says. We're going to beat this. You're going to get better, Scout. I promise you. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to dedicate every waking moment to your recovery, and you're going to live. You're going to live a good life, and I'm going to make sure of it. Scout's breathing was still labored, his body still broken. But when looked into those clouded eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen before, a flicker of hope. Over the next week, implemented everything Doctor had recommended. He gave Scout his medications religiously. He started physical therapy, gentle exercises to help build strength. He invested in a good heating pad for Scout's arthritis. He played soft music and spoke constantly, filling the apartment with his voice, letting Scout know he wasn't alone. And slowly, incrementally, Scout began to change. His ribs were still visible, but less so. His breathing was becoming less labored. He started to move around the apartment on his own, still limping terribly, still obviously in pain, but trying. On the 8th day, something magical happened. Scout walked over to where was sitting and rested his head on his knee. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable to anyone who didn't understand what it meant. But two, it was everything. It was trust. It was the beginning of healing. It was proof that sometimes when you refuse to give up on something broken, that broken thing can refuse to give up on itself. 23 days after bringing Scout home, something shifted in the universe. Had fallen into a rhythm by then. Wake up at 6 a.m., give Scout his medications, prepare his breakfast, spend an hour doing gentle exercises with him. Mid-morning walks around the apartment complex, which Scout approached with increasing determination despite his limp. Afternoon naps where would sit beside Scout, reading or simply existing in quiet companionship. Evening meals, more medications, gentle massage to help with his arthritis. By midnight would be exhausted, but it was a good exhaustion. It was the exhaustion of purpose. The apartment had transformed too. Gone were the dark curtains and closed blinds. Had opened everything, letting sunlight pour through windows that hadn't seen daylight in months. He'd cleaned out the guest room where David's memory had haunted him, replaced the furniture, and made it into Scout's personal space. A comfortable nest of blankets, heating pads, and toys that Scout showed no interest in but that made feel like he was doing something right. He'd also started a journal. Every night before bed would write about Scout's day, how many kibbles he'd eaten, how many steps he'd managed, whether he'd played even a little, whether his breathing sounded easier. These entries weren't for anyone else, had no intention of sharing them. They were documentation of a miracle in progress, proof that hope wasn't completely delusional, that broken things could get better. On that 23rd day, woke to find Scout already awake, which wasn't unusual. But this time, Scout was standing at the side of the bed, looking up at him with those still clouded but increasingly alert eyes. Heart stopped. Scout had never initiated contact like this before. Scout, who'd spent weeks flinching at every touch, who'd cowered at sudden movements, was choosing to be close to him. "Hey, buddy," whispered, not moving, afraid that any sudden action would break this fragile moment. "What's up?" Scout's tail, which had barely wagged in weeks, twitched slightly. Then, with visible effort, the old dog pulled himself up onto the bed, his back legs struggling with the height but his front legs managing the climb. He collapsed beside, breathing heavily from the exertion, and rested his head on his chest. It was such a small thing, a dog resting his head on his human's chest. People did this with their pets every day. It was probably the most ordinary moment in the history of human-animal relationships. But for it was an earthquake. He felt something inside him break open, not in a destructive way, but in the way a dam breaks to release the water that's been building up behind it for months. Tears started flowing, first slowly, then with increasing intensity. His entire body began to shake with sobs that came from somewhere so deep inside him that he wasn't sure they'd ever surfaced before. 6 months. 6 months of holding it together. 6 months of being strong, being functional, being the kind of person who just endured tragedy without falling apart. 6 months of pretending that David's death didn't matter, that his own existence wasn't completely derailed, that he could just move through the world like he hadn't been fundamentally broken by loss. But Scout's head on his chest, Scout's gentle breathing, Scout's simple act of trust, it shattered all of that carefully constructed facade. Buried his face in Scout's neck and cried like he hadn't cried since standing at David's grave. He cried for David, for all the conversations they'd never have, for the wedding that would never happen, for the future that had been stolen. He cried for himself, for the loneliness that had consumed him, for the belief that he was worthless and broken and unlovable. He cried for Scout, for all the pain that dog had endured, for every hand that had hurt him, every person who deemed him disposable. And when the tears finally subsided, something had shifted. Lay there in the dark with Scout's weight on his chest and the dog's breath warm against his skin, and he understood something profound. They were saving each other. Scout wasn't just being rescued, wasn't just being a hero. They were locked in a mutual redemption, two broken creatures learning that they were worth saving, worth loving, worth the effort. "Thank you," whispered to Scout, running his fingers gently through the dog's still matted but gradually improving coat. "Thank you for letting me love you. Thank you for choosing to trust me." Scout's tail thumped weakly against the bed, the strongest Wag had ever felt from him. That morning did something he hadn't done in months. He looked at his phone without dread. He opened Instagram, an app he hadn't used since David's death. His feed was full of other people's lives, their vacations and promotions and happy moments. It felt voyeuristic, like peering into a world he no longer belonged to. But then he thought about what had just happened. He thought about the miracle of Scout's trust, the transformation that was happening in both of them. And he thought about Sue at the auction house, who'd said Scout was a fighter. He thought about Doctor, who'd given him a chance when she might have recommended euthanasia. He thought about all the moments of doubt and fear and the decision to keep trying anyway. He decided to document it. Started small. He took a photo of Scout sleeping in the morning sunlight, his body still thin but less skeletal than before. He wrote a caption, "Day 23, still fighting, still healing, still here." He posted it. Then almost immediately he felt foolish. Who cared about some random dog on the internet? But he posted another photo anyway. Scout eating from his bowl. Scout standing on his own 4 legs without supporting him. Scout's face, peaceful and less afraid than it had been before. Over the next few days documented everything. The small victories accumulated. Scout managed 5 steps on his own. Scout wagged his tail at the sight of his food bowl. Scout approached without flinching. Photographed it all and shared it on Instagram, not with any expectation that anyone would care, but because it helped him process what was happening. It made it real. It turned this private miracle into something external, something he could examine and celebrate. He was surprised when the first person liked one of his photos, then another. Then comments started appearing, "This is beautiful. How can I help? What's this dog's story?" Responded to each comment, sharing Scout's journey from the auction house to his apartment. He shared the diagnosis, the doubts about whether Scout would survive, the decision to try anyway. He shared the good days and the hard days, the moments of progress and the moments of setback. What started as a personal journal transformed into a community. People began following Scout's journey. They shared their own stories of rescue and redemption. They asked about his condition, celebrated his improvements, sent encouraging messages. But more importantly, it gave his suffering meaning. His own pain, David's death, his months of depression and isolation, they all contributed to his ability to recognize Scout's suffering and do something about it. His brokenness had led him to that auction house at exactly the right moment. His despair had made him empathetic enough to see past Scout's damaged exterior to the being underneath. "I think I understand now," said to Scout one evening, scrolling through the comments on his latest post. "I think maybe David died so that I would understand how to save you. Or maybe I had to lose David so that I would be desperate enough, lost enough to find you. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it feels true." Scout's head was on his lap, his breathing steady and peaceful. His eyes had cleared a bit more, the cataracts still present but less pronounced. His ribs were less visible. His coat, while still not perfect, was beginning to look less like straw and more like actual fur. "We're going to make it," continued, stroking Scout's head. "Both of us. We're broken, but we're healing. And maybe that's what life is really about, not being perfect, but choosing to heal anyway. Choosing to keep trying even when it would be easier to give up." Scout's tail thumped gently against his leg. Outside the apartment, the world continued its frantic pace. People rushed to jobs they didn't love. They scrolled through their phones, comparing their lives to others. They lived in a state of quiet desperation, wondering if their existence mattered. But inside this small apartment in Louisville, 2 broken beings had found each other. And in finding each other, they were discovering that they mattered, that their lives had meaning. That redemption wasn't just possible, it was happening, one day at a time, one moment of trust at a time. took a photo of Scout sleeping peacefully in the sunlight and posted it with a simple caption, "Day 23, we're still here, we're still fighting, we're still healing." He had no idea that this photo would eventually reach millions of people. He had no idea that Scout's story would become a beacon of hope for countless individuals struggling with their own darkness. He only knew that for the first time in 6 months, felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. It started small. A photo of Scout, skeletal and hollow-eyed, the day brought him home, paired with a recent photo of Scout standing upright, his coat beginning to look healthy, his eyes more alert. Had arranged the photos side by side and captioned them simply, "Before and After, Day 1 versus Day 45. He posted it on a Wednesday evening at 8:47 p.m. By Thursday morning, it had 12,000 likes. Woke to his phone buzzing constantly. He turned off most notifications months ago, but Instagram was apparently determined to alert him to something. Confused and still half asleep, he unlocked his screen to find that the before and after photo had exploded. Comments were pouring in faster than he could read them. People were sharing it. It was being reposted across different platforms. His follower count, which had been hovering around 300 people who seemed to be mostly bots, had jumped to over 8,000. "What the?" muttered, scrolling through comments in disbelief. "This is exactly what I needed to see today," one woman wrote. "I've been so depressed, and seeing this dog come back to life reminds me that there's hope for me too." Another comment from someone named James. "I was about to give up, on everything, on life. But I watched this dog fight to live, and it made me realize that if Scout can keep trying, so can I. Thank you for sharing this." A third comment, this one with 40,000 likes. "Watching this transformation made me cry. This is what unconditional love looks like. This is what second chances can do." Felt dizzy. He scrolled through more comments, each one more emotional than the last. People were sharing their own stories of rescue and redemption. Someone had adopted a senior dog because of Scout's story. Someone else had quit their abusive job. A teenager had called a suicide hotline after watching Scout's journey. His phone rang. It was an unknown number. Almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hi, is this?" A woman's voice, professional and excited. "Yes. This is Jennifer Park from Louisville Daily News. We've been seeing Scout's story blow up on social media, and we'd love to feature him in our Sunday magazine. Can we set up an interview?" His brain felt like it was moving in slow motion. Yeah, sure, I guess so." That was the first interview. By Friday, there were 10 more requests. Local news wanted to film at his apartment. A regional magazine wanted to do a deep dive feature. Someone from a national animal welfare organization asked if they could use Scout's photos for a campaign. The story was simple, but it was resonating in ways never could have anticipated. A broken dog, rejected at an auction, purchased by a stranger, given a second chance. Slowly, painfully, beautifully transformed, not just physically but spiritually. And alongside that transformation, a broken man was healing too. But it wasn't just the story itself that was capturing people's hearts. It was the videos. Had started posting short videos of Scout's progress. 5-second clips of the dog taking his first pain-free steps, videos of Scout wagging his tail, footage of Scout playing with a toy for the first time. These videos became the most powerful medium. Seeing Scout move, hearing his breathing become less labored, witnessing the joy in his eyes as he discovered things as simple as a sunny patch of floor, it was impossible not to be moved. One video in particular became the turning point. Had filmed Scout attempting to walk down the hallway of his apartment without assistance. It was a simple thing, a dog walking, something millions of dogs did every day. But Scout's walk was a triumph. His left leg still bent inward, his gait still uneven, but he was moving. And more than that, he was moving with purpose. He was walking toward, his tail wagging, his eyes bright. The video was 47 seconds long. It was shared 2.3 million times in 72 hours. Watched in real time as the comments section exploded. Celebrities were posting about Scout. News outlets were writing articles. A veterinary school used Scout's story as a case study in animal rehabilitation. An animal shelter in California created a Scout's Second Chance adoption initiative specifically for senior and disabled animals. The engagement was surreal. Would refresh his Instagram and find himself with another 50,000 followers. News outlets he'd never heard of were requesting interviews. People were creating fan art of Scout. Someone had made a playlist of uplifting music set to Scout's transformation videos. But underneath the excitement was terrified. This attention, while wonderful, was exposing his private healing process to the entire world. Every aspect of his grief, his depression, his journey back to feeling like life was worth living. It was all being analyzed and discussed and commodified. He was receiving messages from people who said Scout's story had saved their lives. And while he was grateful for that, he also felt an enormous pressure to continue being inspirational, to keep Scout looking perfect, to maintain this narrative of redemption. There were also negative comments which surprised him. People accused him of exploiting Scout for likes. People questioned whether Scout was actually happy or just trained to perform. Someone wrote a lengthy comment about how Scout should probably be euthanized, that keeping him alive was selfish and cruel. Those comments hurt more than expected. He was lying in bed one night, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion, scrolling through the negativity, when Scout crawled up beside him and rested his head on his chest. It was a familiar gesture now, one that happened almost every night. But this time it grounded. It reminded him of why he was doing this. "They're wrong," whispered to Scout. "You're happy, I can feel it. You want to be here, you want to live." Scout's tail thumped against the bed. The first major media appearance happened on a Tuesday morning. A national morning show had flown and Scout to New York, had never been on television before, and he was a nervous wreck. Scout, meanwhile, seemed remarkably calm, as if he understood the importance of the moment. When they walked onto the set, the entire studio erupted in applause. The hosts, three people with impossibly white teeth and enthusiastic energy, rushed over to hug and pet Scout. Scout, true to his nature, remained dignified but allowed the affection. "Tell us about Scout's journey," one of the hosts said, settling back into her chair. "Our viewers are absolutely captivated by his story." Took a breath and told it. He talked about the auction house, about seeing Scout rejected by everyone. He talked about the drive home, the first week, the doubts about whether Scout would survive. He talked about the turning point, about Scout resting his head on his chest and finally allowing himself to grieve. But most importantly, he talked about what Scout had taught him. "Scout showed me that being broken doesn't mean you're worthless," said, and he was surprised to find tears in his eyes on live television. Scout was rejected by everyone at that auction. His body was damaged. His spirit was broken, but he still had value. He still deserved a chance. And watching him fight to live, watching him refuse to give up even when it would have been easier, it changed me. It made me realize that I deserved a chance too, that my life mattered even if I felt broken. The segment went viral immediately. Within hours, it had been viewed 15 million times. Hashtags appeared. Scout's Second Chance, Choose Love, Broken but Not Worthless. Organizations started reaching out to about partnering with him. A publishing house sent a proposal for a book. A production company wanted to make a documentary. It was overwhelming, it was beautiful, it was terrifying. That night back in Louisville, sat with Scout in their apartment. The place that had started as a refuge for two broken beings and had become the epicenter of a global movement. "We did it," Buddy said, scratching behind Scout's ears. "We just changed the world." Scout's tail wagged gently, and he pressed closer against his leg. What neither of them knew was that this was just the beginning. The viral moment had captured people's attention, but what came next would require Scout to become more than just an inspiration. It would require to transform his personal miracle into a mission that would save hundreds of animals. But for now, in this quiet moment, they simply existed together. Two beings who had found each other in the darkness. Two souls who refused to give up. Two lives that were proof that redemption was possible, that second chances mattered, that love could heal almost anything. And the world was finally listening. The requests started arriving 3 days after the morning show appearance. Emails, direct messages, letters, all asking the same basic question: can you help my dog? A woman in Tennessee had a senior dog no shelter would take. A man in Ohio had found an abandoned 3-legged cat and couldn't afford the medical bills. A shelter in Arkansas was overcrowded with unadoptable animals and didn't know what to do. An elderly woman in North Carolina had a blind dog and was terrified of what would happen to him after she passed away. Read through these messages on a Saturday morning, each one a small tragedy, each one a problem he wanted desperately to solve but had no idea how to address. He'd saved Scout, but Scout was just one dog. There were thousands of Scouts out there, millions maybe, all deemed worthless by a world that had no patience for broken things. He was sitting at his kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside him, when the idea struck him. Had spent the last 5 years working as a software developer. He'd built databases, designed user interfaces, created systems that organized information in meaningful ways. He'd been good at his job, successful even, but he'd never felt like his work meant anything. He'd been building apps for companies that didn't need them, solving problems that didn't matter. What if he used those skills for something that actually did matter? That afternoon, started planning. He called Doctor and asked if she knew other veterinarians interested in helping rescue animals at reduced rates. He reached out to Sue at the auction house and asked about the logistics of animals being rejected and what happened to them. He contacted several local animal shelters and asked about their biggest challenges. The picture that emerged was heartbreaking. Animals deemed unadoptable because of age, disability, or behavior issues were euthanized by the thousands every year. Shelters were overwhelmed and underfunded. Rescuers worked independently without coordination, often duplicating efforts or missing animals that needed help. There was no system, no network, no way to connect people who wanted to save animals with the animals that needed saving. Spent the next week sketching out a solution. He called it Scout's Second Chance, and the core concept was elegantly simple: a database and matching system that would connect senior animals, disabled animals, and animals deemed unadoptable with potential adopters. But it was more than just a listing service. It would include medical information, behavioral assessments, care guides, and success stories. It would educate adopters about what it meant to take on a special needs animal. It would provide resources and support to make the process less daunting. He reached out to several technology companies he knew, explaining the concept. To his surprise, they didn't just support the idea, they wanted to be part of it. Developers offered to work pro. A cloud hosting company donated server space. A design firm redesigned his initial sketches into something beautiful and user-friendly. Within 3 weeks, Scout's Second Chance was online. The launch was modest. Posted about it on his Instagram, and the response was overwhelming. Within 24 hours, they had received applications from over 500 animals needing placement. Within a week, they'd facilitated 60 successful adoptions. Within a month, that number had grown to over 200. But quickly realized that a website, no matter how good, wasn't enough. These animals needed hands-on support. They needed veterinary care, behavioral assessment, foster homes, and follow-up support. They needed advocacy. So made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He left his job. His company tried to convince him to stay. They offered him a raise, flexible hours, anything to keep him, but had tasted purpose, and his old career felt hollow in comparison. He gave his notice and committed to Scout's Second Chance full-time. The first month was terrifying. Burned through his savings quickly, paying for website hosting, supplies, and emergency medical care for animals that came through their network. He was working 18-hour days, screening applicants, coordinating with shelters, following up on placements. His apartment became an unofficial headquarters, with files everywhere and his kitchen table constantly occupied by someone: a volunteer, a shelter worker, a potential adopter. But then something magical happened. Other people started showing up. A retired veterinary technician named Helen volunteered her expertise. A college student named A Different, which was confusing, started helping with social media. 3 local college students offered to help with the database. Mrs., his landlord, began coordinating adoptions. Doctor herself became the organization's official veterinary consultant, offering discounted services and training other vets to understand special needs animals. What had started as a personal mission was becoming a community effort. By month 3, Scouts Second Chance had an official nonprofit status. They'd secured a small grant from an animal welfare foundation. They'd partnered with 12 shelters across Kentucky and Tennessee. They'd facilitated over 400 successful adoptions. More importantly, they'd created a culture where broken animals weren't disposable, they were treasured. Where age and disability weren't reasons for euthanasia but opportunities for love. Scout himself became the face of the movement. He appeared at adoption events, where his mere presence seemed to inspire people. A young couple adopted a senior German shepherd after meeting Scout. A single mother adopted a 3-legged cat. An elderly man adopted a blind dog and later told that the dog had given him a reason to wake up in the morning. But beyond the adoptions, Scout Second Chance was changing how people thought about animal rescue. They started receiving messages from shelters nationwide asking to use their system. Other cities wanted to start their own Scout Second Chance chapters. Universities wanted to study their model. Was invited to speak at veterinary conferences. He was asked to consult with major animal welfare organizations. He was suddenly recognized as an expert in special needs animal adoption, something that had seemed impossible 6 months earlier when he was too depressed to leave his apartment. One afternoon, about 6 months into the nonprofit's operation, was sitting in an adoption event in a local park when a woman approached him. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a warmth that reminded him of Doctor. "Are you?" she asked. "I am," said. "Are you interested in adopting a special needs animal?" "I'm actually a journalist," the woman said, pulling out her business card. "I'm working on a feature story about nonprofits that are changing the animal welfare landscape. Your organization is incredible, but what I'm really interested in is the human story. How did you go from being a software engineer to running a national animal rescue movement?" Was quiet for a moment, looking over at Scout, who was napping peacefully under a tree, his body now healthy and strong, his coat shiny, his face content. "I was broken," said finally. "I'd experienced a loss that seemed insurmountable. I was depressed, isolated, convinced that my life didn't matter. Then I met Scout at an auction and he was broken too. But when I looked at him, I realized that being broken didn't mean being worthless. It just meant we both needed a second chance. And somewhere along the way, helping Scout heal helped me heal too." "And now," the journalist asked. "Now I understand that my grief wasn't wasted. My pain served a purpose. It gave me the empathy to recognize Scout's suffering and do something about it. And that experience is helping me help others do the same thing. We're not just saving animals. We're showing people that broken things can become beautiful things. That second chances matter. That love can heal almost anything." The journalist nodded, jotting notes. "Have you thought about what's next for Scout's Second Chance?" Looked around at the adoption event, at the couples playing with senior dogs, at the families falling in love with 3-legged cats and one-eyed rabbits, at the volunteers who'd showed up on a Saturday to help match animals with homes. "I think we're just getting started," said. "Scout showed me that one life can create a ripple effect. One act of compassion can inspire thousands. My goal is to make sure that every animal like Scout, every broken, rejected, deemed worthless creature, gets that second chance. And if we can do that, if we can change the way society thinks about disability and age and imperfection, then maybe we can change how people think about those things in themselves too. That evening, after the adoption event had ended and Scout was resting at home, sat down at his computer and started working on the next phase of the project. They were going to expand into other states. They were going to create educational programs for schools. They were going to build a network of thousands of volunteers dedicated to one simple principle: everyone deserves a second chance. Scout curled up on the bed beside his desk, opened one eye and thumped his tail softly, as if to say, "I told you so." Scratched behind the old dog's ears and smiled. 6 months ago, he'd bought a dying dog at an auction for $75. He'd done it out of desperation and grief, expecting nothing, hopping only to ease one creature's suffering. He had no idea that in doing so, he would transform his own life, and eventually, the lives of thousands of others. But that was the magic of second chances. You never knew where they would lead. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in March, about 18 months after Scout's story had gone viral. It was a handwritten letter, which was unusual enough in its experience to make him pause. The return address was from a small town in Ohio that had never heard of. Inside was a letter written in careful, precise handwriting on lined notebook paper. Sat down at his kitchen table, Scout resting his head on his lap, and began to read. "Dear," it started, "my name is Emma Reeves and I'm 16 years old. I'm writing to you because I owe you my life." Felt his chest tighten. He'd received many letters like this before, messages from people who claimed that Scout's story had helped them in various ways. But something about this one felt different. He kept reading. "3 years ago I started having depression," Emma wrote. "At first it was just sadness, like the world was gray and empty, but it got worse. By the time I was 14, I was having thoughts about harming myself. By 15, I had a plan. I had set a date. I was going to do it on November 14th, which would have been exactly 1 year after my grandmother died. I thought it would be poetic, like joining her, like finally escaping the pain that never stopped. My parents didn't know how bad it was. They thought I was just a moody teenager. My school counselor, who I talked to twice, suggested I had normal teenage angst. Nobody saw me. Nobody understood that I was literally dying inside, that every morning I woke up was a disappointment because I hadn't succeeded in killing myself the night before. 2 days before November 14th, I was alone in my room, which was my usual state since I'd isolated myself from almost everyone, and I was scrolling through YouTube. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was actually watching videos about suicide methods, trying to find the least painful option. And then an algorithm glitch or divine intervention, or whatever you want to call it, served me your video. It was the one where Scout is walking down the hallway for the first time without support. I don't know why I clicked on it. I don't know why I watched it, but I did. What struck me first was Scout's eyes. Even though he was old and broken and had suffered so much, there was light in those eyes. There was a will to live. And I thought, this dog has every reason to give up. His body is destroyed. His life has been full of pain. No one wanted him. No one thought he deserved to live. And yet here he is trying, really trying. I watched that video about 50 times that day. I watched the before and after photos. I read your Instagram captions where you talked about your own depression, about losing your best friend, about how Scout had saved you as much as you'd saved him. And something inside me shifted. If Scout could choose to keep fighting, why couldn't I? I want to be clear. One video didn't magically cure my depression. I'm still in therapy. I'm still on medication. I still have hard days where the darkness feels overwhelming. But Scout gave me permission to try. He showed me that being broken wasn't a reason to die. It was just a reason to need extra love and care. I didn't attempt suicide on November 14th. Instead, I told my parents how bad things had gotten. We found a good therapist. I started medication. I joined a support group for teenagers with depression. It was hard, and some days I still struggled with suicidal thoughts, but I kept coming back to Scout's story. Whenever I felt like giving up, I would watch that video and remind myself, if he can do it, so can I. A year later, my family adopted a dog named Daisy from a local shelter. Daisy was a senior dog, probably 12 years old, with some behavioral issues and a limp. Most people walked past her cage, but when I saw her, I saw Scout. I saw something broken that deserved love anyway. We brought her home, and she became my best friend. More than that, she became my reason to keep getting up in the morning. Knowing that Daisy depended on me, that I was the one person who could give her the life she deserved, gave me purpose. I'm now 16 and I volunteer at a local animal shelter. I've helped place 17 senior and special needs animals with families. I'm working with the shelter to start a Scout Second Chance chapter in our county. I'm still in therapy, still taking medication, still having hard days. But I'm alive. I'm actually alive. And I have Scout to thank for that. I wanted you to know that Scout's impact goes so much deeper than adoptions and viral videos. You're literally saving human lives. You're giving people reasons to believe in second chances, reasons to keep trying, reasons to stay alive. Every animal you save is a life-changing moment for someone. Every foster or adoptee becomes an ambassador for hope. I'm coming to Louisville next month for spring break, and I was wondering if I could meet you and Scout in person. I've been following your journey for 3 years, and I would give anything to look into Scout's eyes and thank him. To thank you both for giving me my life back. Your friend, even though we've never met. Emma Reeves. P.S. I've attached a photo of Daisy. She's Scout's granddaughter in spirit, if not in blood. I think Scout would be proud of her. Read the letter 3 times before he could trust himself to speak. The first time, tears rolled down his face before he got past the second paragraph. Scout, sensing his distress, climbed into his lap and rested his head on his chest. That same gesture he'd made that morning 23 days after coming home, the gesture that had broken open to his own grief. "Did you hear that, buddy?" whispered into Scout's fur. "You saved her life. You actually saved her life." Scout's tail thumped gently against his leg. Immediately called doctor and asked her to help coordinate Emma's visit. He reached out to Scout's Second Chance volunteers and let them know that they'd be hosting a very special guest. He printed out the letter and shared it with the team, and within hours, everyone was in tears. When Emma arrived in Louisville 3 weeks later, she was exactly what expected and nothing like he'd imagined. She was a small girl, barely 5'2", with dark hair and kind eyes that looked simultaneously older than 16 and heartbreakingly young. She stood in the doorway of his apartment, trembling slightly, and when she saw Scout, something shifted in her expression. "Hi, Scout," she whispered, kneeling down to the dog's level. Scout, now 14 years old but healthy and strong, approached her slowly and rested his head against her chest. Emma burst into tears. For the next hour, Emma and Scout simply sat together. Emma told Scout about her depression, about the day she'd watched his video, about how he'd given her a reason to live. She told him about Daisy, about volunteering at the shelter, about her plans to expand Scout's Second Chance in Ohio. And Scout, with the wisdom that only a dog who'd been through his own hell could possess, listened. He leaned against her. He let her cry into his fur. He was simply present. Watched from across the room, phone in hand, documenting the moment. He knew that this image, a broken girl and a broken dog, both healed, both whole, both connected by the power of second chances, would become one of the most important photos in Scout's Second Chances history. "Thank you," Emma said to Scout, after her tears had subsided. "Thank you for teaching me that broken things can become beautiful." Scout's tail thumped against the floor as if to say, "You already were beautiful. You just needed someone to believe in you." That evening, posted the photo to Instagram with a simple caption. "Emma came to meet Scout today. 3 years ago, Emma was planning to end her life. Then she watched Scout's transformation video and decided to give herself a second chance instead. Today, she's a thriving teenager who volunteers with rescued animals. Scout didn't just change my life. He's changing the world. The post went viral again, accumulating millions of views within 24 hours. But more importantly, it demonstrated the full scope of Scout's impact. It wasn't just about the animals being rescued. It was about the humans being rescued too. It was about showing a broken world that redemption was possible, that second chances mattered, that one act of love could create ripples that healed people you'd never meet. Emma stayed in Louisville for a week. She met Doctor, who immediately began mentoring her on animal behavior and rehabilitation. She volunteered at the Maine Scouts Second Chance headquarters. She met volunteers and adopters and animals who'd been saved. She became part of the community that Scout had inspired. On her last night, Emma sat on the apartment balcony with Scout between them, watching the sun set over Louisville. "I have something I want to tell you," Emma said. "I'm going to college to study animal psychology and rescue rehabilitation. I want to dedicate my life to this work. I want to help animals like Scout and people like me, people who are broken and think they're worthless. I want to show them that they're not." Smiled, feeling the weight of purpose. The knowledge that one decision to save a dog had set in motion a chain reaction of redemption that would ripple through countless lives. "Scout would be proud of you," said. Emma leaned her head on shoulder, and together they watched as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The colors of transformation, of hope, of second chances made manifest. Scout died on a Tuesday afternoon in September, exactly 3 years and 2 weeks after had bought him at the auction for $75. Knew it was coming. Doctor had warned him months ago that Scout's time was limited. The old dog's arthritis had worsened, his breathing had become more labored, and his energy had started to fade. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally were two entirely different things. That morning, Scout had seemed okay. He'd eaten his breakfast, taken a slow walk around the apartment, and settled into his favorite spot, the sunny corner of the bedroom where he'd spent countless afternoons. Sat beside him, as he had thousands of times before, running his fingers through Scout's now healthy coat, feeling the rhythm of his breathing. Around 3 o'clock, Scout's breathing changed. It became shallower, more irregular. Called Doctor, who came immediately. She examined Scout gently, her eyes kind but sad. "He's ready," Doctor said quietly. "He's lived a beautiful life, a life full of love. That's more than most creatures get." Laid his head on Scout's chest and wept. Scout's heart was still beating, but more slowly now, as if the old dog was simply powering down, preparing to rest. Whispered to him, telling him it was okay to go, thanking him for everything he'd taught, for every life he'd touched. At 3:47 p.m., Scout's breathing stopped. Held him for hours after, unable to let go. Doctor sat quietly nearby, tears streaming down her own face. When finally released Scout to the veterinary staff for cremation, as they'd planned, it felt like releasing a piece of his own soul. The memorial service was held 2 weeks later at a local park, the same park where Scout had attended countless adoption events, had expected maybe 50 people to show up. He wasn't prepared for the 300 that came. They arrived in waves. Adopters whose lives Scout had changed, people who'd adopted senior dogs and 3-legged cats and blind rabbits because Scout had shown them that broken things were worth saving. Volunteers who'd worked with Scout's Second Chance, who dedicated their time and energy to the mission Scout had inspired. Veterinarians and shelter workers and rescue organizations from across the country, journalists and photographers, and Emma, who'd flown in from Ohio, her eyes red from crying. But most surprisingly, there were strangers, people who'd seen Scout's videos on the internet, who'd been moved by his story, who'd felt inspired to make changes in their own lives. A woman who'd started a mental health support group after watching Scout's journey. A man who'd quit his corporate job to start an animal rescue. A teenager who decided not to take her own life because Scout had shown her that broken things could heal. Stood at the front of the gathered crowd, Scout's ashes in a wooden urn, and felt completely overwhelmed. He'd known, intellectually, that Scout's story had resonated with people. The viral videos had millions of views. Scout's second chance had saved thousands of animals. But standing here, seeing the actual faces of people whose lives had been changed by one old dog, drove it home in a way nothing else could. "Thank you all for being here," began, his voice shaky. Scout was just a dog. He couldn't speak. He couldn't write. He couldn't explain why his life mattered. But through his simple act of existing, of choosing to trust again despite his trauma, of healing despite the odds, he changed the world. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. 3.5 years ago, Scout was at an auction house. No one wanted him. Everyone thought he was worthless. He was broken, old, and damaged. And if I'm being honest, I was in the same place. I was broken, I was grieving, and I didn't think my life had any value. But Scout saw something in me, just like I saw something in him. We recognized each other as fellow survivors, as creatures who'd been through hell but still had fight left in us. His voice cracked with emotion. "When I bought Scout that day, I thought I was saving him. But he was saving me. He taught me that being broken doesn't make you worthless. It makes you human. It makes you capable of profound empathy." Scout's brokenness became his superpower. It allowed him to connect with other broken creatures, to inspire people who felt like they'd been discarded by the world, to show everyone watching that redemption is possible. He looked down at the urn in his hands. Scout lived his last 3 years with more love, more comfort, and more joy than his entire previous life combined. He spent his days being loved unconditionally. He spent his time helping other animals find homes. He became an ambassador for hope, a symbol of second chances, a reminder that every life matters. Doctor came forward and stood beside. "I want to share something," she said, her voice trembling. "When first brought Scout to my clinic, I recommended euthanasia. I thought the kindest thing would be to let him go. I've been practicing veterinary medicine for 35 years, and I've euthanized thousands of animals, but I've never been more wrong about anything in my life. Scout proved that age and disability and trauma don't determine an animal's worth. Scout proved that love can heal things we thought were beyond healing. And Scout inspired me to change the way I practice medicine. Every animal now has a chance, no matter how old, no matter how broken. Scout changed my entire philosophy as a veterinarian." Emma stepped forward next, tears streaming down her face. "Scout saved my life," she said simply. 3 years ago, I was planning to end my life. I was convinced I was worthless, that the world would be better without me. Then I watched Scout's video and I saw that broken things could become whole, that damaged creatures could find love, that second chances were real. Scout gave me permission to try, to believe in myself, to reach out for help. If Scout hadn't existed, I wouldn't be here today. I owe my life to this dog, and I will spend my life honoring that gift." One by one, people came forward to share their stories. An elderly man who'd adopted a senior dog and found a reason to live. A woman who'd left an abusive marriage because Scout's story had shown her that she deserved better. A teenager who decided to pursue animal science instead of a corporate career. A therapist who'd started using rescue animals in her practice because Scout had demonstrated the healing power of human-animal bonds. After all the speeches, led the group to an ancient oak tree at the edge of the park. He'd chosen this tree specifically because it stood apart from the main gathering area, peaceful and strong, rooted deeply in the earth. A stone plaque had been placed at its base. Scout's legacy, a dog who taught the world about second chances. Every broken thing deserves love. Every life matters. Every creature is worthy of redemption. Scattered Scout's ashes beneath the tree, watching as they mixed with the soil that would nourish new growth. There was something deeply poetic about it. Scout's physical form returning to the earth, becoming part of something new, continuing to create life even after his death. Over the following months, Scout's Second Chance experienced unprecedented growth. Emma and launched a national educational initiative teaching schools about rescue and rehabilitation. They opened 2 new regional headquarters. They trained and mentored hundreds of volunteers. By the end of the year, they'd facilitated over 5,000 animal adoptions, and they'd received thousands of messages from people whose lives had been changed by Scout's story. But perhaps the most significant legacy was subtler and harder to measure. Scout had fundamentally shifted how society thought about disability, age, and imperfection. Shelters across the country reported increased adoption rates for senior animals. Mental health organizations incorporated Scout's story into their awareness campaigns. Schools used Scout's journey to teach lessons about compassion and resilience. 1 year after Scout's death, was invited to speak at a major animal welfare conference. He stood before hundreds of veterinarians, rescue workers, and animal lovers, and he talked about the dog who changed everything. Scout didn't ask to be special, said. He didn't volunteer to become a symbol or an inspiration. He was just a dog who wanted to be loved. But in allowing himself to be loved, in choosing to heal despite his trauma, in simply being himself, Scout showed the world something profound. He showed us that broken things are often the most beautiful things, that our scars don't define us, that everyone, human and animal alike, deserves a second chance. He paused, looking out at the audience. I started Scout's Second Chance because I wanted to save animals. But what I've learned is that when you save an animal, you're not just saving that one creature. You're creating a ripple effect of compassion that touches hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of lives. Every animal you rescue becomes an ambassador for hope. Every life you save demonstrates the possibility of redemption. Smiled, thinking of Scout resting beneath that oak tree, his ashes nourishing new growth. Scout is gone, but his legacy is just beginning. Every animal that Scout's Second Chance saves carries his spirit forward. Every person inspired by his story becomes part of his mission. And every creature that learns what it means to be loved unconditionally, that's Scout, continuing his work, continuing to change the world. That evening, returned to the apartment that he and Scout had shared for 3 years. It was quieter now, emptier in ways that had nothing to do with Scout's physical absence. But as looked around at the photos on the wall, the videos saved on his computer, the emails from people whose lives had been saved by Scout's story, he didn't feel sad. He felt grateful. Scout had come into his life at exactly the moment he needed it most. A broken dog had found a broken man, and together they'd learned that brokenness wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. It was the crack through which light could enter. It was the opportunity for redemption. Picked up his phone and opened Instagram. He posted one final photo, Scout beneath the oak tree on that last sunny afternoon, his eyes peaceful, his body content, his spirit finally at rest. The caption read simply, "Thank you, Scout. Thank you for teaching the world about second chances. Thank you for showing us that every life matters. Thank you for loving us back to life. Your legacy will live on forever." Within hours, the post had been shared hundreds of thousands of times. Comments flooded in from people around the world sharing their own stories of rescue and redemption, their own journeys of healing inspired by one old dog's refusal to give up. And somewhere in the vast digital landscape of the internet, Scout's story, the story of a rejected dog at an auction who became a beacon of hope for a broken world, continued to inspire, continued to heal, continued to change lives. Because that's what Scout had been all along, not just a dog but a mirror, a reflection of our own capacity for healing, a testament to the power of second chances, a reminder that being broken doesn't make you worthless. It makes you human. And humanity, in all its broken, beautiful complexity, is worth saving. The end.